All right. Good morning, everyone. Um, my name is Susie Seitz, and I am the new Waiver Support Coordinator Liaison for the state office. Um, I'm taking over for the role that used to be Elizabeth Matthews. And today I'm here with Opal Ringo, who's a training and research consultant here at the state office, and has put together a wonderful presentation for you. Firstly, we need to do just a little housekeeping. Please note that there are several handouts attached to the webinar that you can download. And if you have any questions, there's also a little questions panel. Please feel free to use the questions box and we will get to them as we can. If you are joining us today for in-service credit, we do have the post-assessment test that will be given at the end of this training. So please be sure that you stay until the end to receive that information. And as always, this presentation will be recorded and will be posted on the APD website soon so that you'll have that to look back on. So now I will hand it over to Opal.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward with the presentation because on my end, all systems are go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Opal Ringo, and I am the, as I said, the training and research consultant in the Bureau of Consumer Supports at APD. And my areas of focus are supported living, supported employment, and adult day training. This morning, we're going to be talking about the Waiver Support Coordinator's role in supported living. On the screen now, you should be able to see the presentation. Okay. All right, here we go. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about a brief overview of supported living. I'm going to talk about the supported living coach's responsibilities in supported living, the waiver support coordinator's responsibilities in supported living, monitoring supported living services, and then we're going to have some questions and answers. I'll go over some frequently asked questions and give you guys an opportunity to get some of your questions answered when you put them in the question box. So as I go through the presentation, if you have any questions, just write them down, jot them down on a sheet of paper, your notes, and at the end, or you can just put them in the question box. And at the end, we'll scroll through and take a look at all of those. Okay, so for the first agenda item, overview of supported living. What is supported living? Supported living is a category of residential services that provide the necessary supports for a person with a developmental disability to live in their own home, become fully integrated into the community, and participate in community life to the fullest extent possible. That is the goal of supported living. And some of the key words are it's a residential service. It's helping people to live in their own home and for them to become fully integrated into the community. So that's what it's all about. And it has three defining components. What separates supported living from other living settings, there's a philosophy to our approach to supported living. It is a specific kind of living setting, and there are specific services that are offered as part of supported living. So we're going to go into each of these three components. Okay, the philosophy, this is the approach that we take at APD and the approach that we advocate that waiver support coordinators and supported living coaches have with our clients. The first thing is person-centered and individualized services. We want to make sure that the individual is the center of the services. So we cater to the needs and the preferences of that individual. The person receiving services is the client. A waiver support coordinator, any service provider, is hired by that client, by the person, and it is the responsibility of the service provider to provide great customer service to retain that client or that customer. So again, it ties into that person-centered approach. The person's voice must be heard. That means that when any decisions are made that concern that person, I know you've all probably heard the phrase, nothing about me without me. Well, we're talking about nothing about me without me having a voice in it, without me having a say in it. So the person's voice, even if the person is a non-verbal, doesn't communicate verbally, they have a way of communicating, and it is the responsibility of service providers to learn that way of communicating to the that person has, to learn that way and to learn how to allow that person to make decisions. The person's choices must be heard. This means that, again, along with their voice, not heard, the person's choices must be honored. We want to ensure that individuals, everything that's happening in supported living is based on what that individual chooses. So we want to honor their choices and their decision-making power in their own lives. And last but not least, the person's health and safety must be maintained. And what we mean by that is that the services that are offered are Medicaid waiver services. All of service providers are Medicaid waiver service providers, and our utmost responsibility is to ensure that if we put that person or support that person to be in a supported living environment, that their health and safety is maintained. And that comes even more significant than their choices is their health and safety. So if there's if a client is making a choice that is a significant risk to their health and safety, that's the only time where a service provider might step in. But other than that, the choices are honored. So what I mean by that is if they're making a choice that might harm them physically or harm, may bring significant risk to their safety. And now let's talk about legal representation. In an effort to honor choices and decisions, we know that sometimes the people that are in the lives of our clients, they want to help and they want to maybe speak up on their behalf. But it's important to understand that any person who is 18 years or older is their own legal representative unless there's documentation to verify that they have a legal representative, and that person, that legal representative, has the decision-making authority. So we want to see documentation. Other than that, that person's voice, that person's choice is what must be honored. So they make decisions, they decide who is providing services to them and the services that they need. Types of legal representation, if the person does have legal representation, includes power of attorney, durable power of attorney. There will be court documents that show that a person is a POA or DPOA. And so in order to give that person decision-making authority in someone's life, we would have to see that documentation. We would have to see if there's court orders of a guardianship, and not only looking at just the orders, but look to see what that decision-making power is, because sometimes you will read those orders and we'll see that, well, they only have the right to make decisions on health, or they only have the right to make decisions in certain areas of their lives. So we have to be very mindful and make sure that we get that documentation. In the handout section of this PowerPoint, there's the Lighting the Way guide that goes more into types of legal representation. The last on here is like a healthcare surrogate and medical proxy. Like those types of legal representations, of course, have to do with health and medical only. They will not be making financial decisions in that person's life. Now let's talk about the second defining factor of a supported living as a whole. It's the setting. In a supported living setting, it is the place is a client's own home. It's their own home where they receive supported living coaching service and or personal support services. So they're living and they're receiving supports. An own home means a house, apartment, or some comparable living space to a house or apartment meeting community housing standards, which the recipient chooses, owns or rents, and controls. And those words are underlined for a reason. This is the recipient's choice. Unless it's a home that they received from a parent, maybe a parent willed the home to them and they have the deed to that home, they are choosing a home in the community, any home available to anyone, and they should own it and they should control it. That is a supported living setting. So here's some more supported living setting requirements. The housing unit, it's a home that's available to anyone in the community for rent or purchase. The home must meet HUD housing quality standards. And this is why that initial housing survey is used in the beginning of looking for homes. They use the initial housing survey to determine if the home meets HUD housing quality standards. The home must be the client's choice and within the client's financial resources. And the home must not be located on the same property as the recipient's family home. The only time that can happen is if there is a waiver from APD that would allow the client to be in a home, and that's given on a case-by-case basis. The client has to seek a waiver. So, for example, if maybe a grandparent or parent deeded some property and one family member owns one plot or of land and the person owns another, and they don't have any family support in their home, then that might be a consideration. But before normal circumstances, if a person is co-located on a family property, they have that family support. So it's not really a supported living setting, not typically. The home shouldn't be owned by a provider or a member of the provider's immediate family. That means the personal support provider, the supported living coach, the waiver support coordinator. They shouldn't have any ownership interest. They shouldn't have any family members that have ownership interest in the client's home. That is the client's home only if we're talking about a supported living setting. And because a hotel or a rooming house or boarding house does not meet community housing standards, they do not qualify as supported living settings. Okay, the services. A client in a supported living setting receives two types of services. They either receive supported living coaching services or personal support services, or they might receive both. The difference between a supported living setting and an independent living setting is the support. And the supported living coaches, they provide the client with support to help them to learn the skills that they need to live as independently as possible in that home environment. That's the goal of the supported living coach, is to support that independent living goal that the client has. And the goal of the personal support provider is usually to assist and help that client to achieve their daily tasks. So sometimes the roles or the tasks of these two types of providers may seem to overlap. But if you think about the goal of the providers, one is to provide personal support to help that client meet their daily living needs, and the other one is to provide supported living coaching and training to help that client gain skills. So skill acquisition is the center of the supported living coaching piece. Now we're going to talk about the SLC's responsibilities in supported living after that brief overview. Okay, so let's first talk about when a supported living coach is hired. What happens is the client says, I want to live in my own home, and the WSC helps that client to interview supported living coaches, because remember, it's the client's choice, and the client chooses their own supported living coach to become a member of their circle of supports. Once that person is chosen, they become a member of the client's team, and it's very important to understand this teamwork aspect. The client's circle of support consists of the WSC, the family and friends that they may have. If they have a legal representative, that person is definitely an important member of the team, and they have to be sought for the decisions that apply to their role as a legal representative. And then there are unpaid service providers, and this is usually family and friends that volunteer and provide supports to the client. It might be a family member who cuts hair and helps with those kind of hygiene and upkeep things for the individual. But any service or support that the individual needs that comes from an unpaid family member or friend is a natural support. Now, this does not include if a family member or friend gives that person a discount. Discounts, you still have to count that as, okay, the money is still coming from the client to pay for services. They're not providers under APD, but it's important to know, especially when we're looking at the client's budget, because money is coming out of their budget maybe to pay for gas or to pay for haircuts or things like that. So just know that unpaid service providers is what we mean by natural supports, and this is family and friends that volunteer with no financial benefit. The paid service providers are personal support providers, supported living coaches, and other waiver providers. But we have to remember that the client's budget, we have to be good stewards of that budget and make sure that we look at unpaid service providers to support them before going to paid service providers. Remember that the budget, it's a payer of last resort. So we want the client's support system to be fully engaged in their life, and the APD to come in when necessary, like to fill in the gaps, so to speak. So what should you expect the SLC to do? The SLC duties, they're based on, first of all, the identified needs of the client. The first thing that an SLC is going to be doing once they're hired is to begin assessing the client's needs. They do a financial assessment, they do a functional community assessment to see what kind of training and support needs the client will have in the community. They're doing all that to make sure that any needs are going to be addressed in their services. So they're going to start there. They're also going to look at the support plan to look at the goals. What are the client's goals for supported living? We know that for every client, the main goal is that they can live as independently as possible in their own home and be integrated in the community. Of course, that's the whole intent of supported living. But for every client, they're going to have specific needs and preferences. So for example, one client may need support with learning how to wash their clothes and learning how to cook meals for the first time. They may need that kind of support. Another client may need a support with mobility, because they use a wheelchair for mobility, and we need to make sure that the housing is appropriate and accessible to a wheelchair. So we've got to look at the goals related to that specific client. And we're also looking at, or the SLC is also going to be doing the duties assigned by the WSC. So at the beginning of services, you as the WSC should be sitting down with the supported living coach and saying and letting them know what duties are assigned. We already know that supported living coaches and personal supports, they may have some overlapping duties. So we want to make sure that it's very clear to them what the duties are going to be for that client. And last but most important, the SLC always helps to safeguard the client's health, safety, and well-being. So they do have some essential duties. Now, some of the duties are going to be, again, based on that client. They have to be individualized and targeted to meet that client's needs as part of that client's circle of support, as you know, as assigned by the WSC. But then there are also duties that the SLC will do for every single client, and they're on the next slides. So this duty number 1, they're going to help address any behavioral or emotional health needs. If the client has any behavioral issues, the WSC should help to address those. They're going to come forward with them, even if they're not seen now. Maybe once they're in a supported living environment and they come up, that's what's going to happen. That the SLC is supposed to always be looking to support clients in this area. Health and healthcare needs, safety needs, their choices and their preferences, their community participation and involvement, and helping the client to know about their rights. If you look at the bold items, you'll notice that most of these have to do, again, with that health and safety. And the community participation and involvement has to do with their mental health and well-being. For we understand the importance that community involvement is in for our own mental health and well-being, and knowing about their rights. So those are some essential duties of the SLC. And also addressing abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Just like for the WSC or support coordinator, you guys, it's important for the SLC to address abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And there are 4 areas that they need to help the client with on an ongoing basis. They've got to help that client define abuse, to understand what it means, to know when and how to report it, to collect information about the client's history of abuse. They've got to help do that, and to address any identified needs and critical issues related to the client's history of abuse. So they're going to help the client, even if the abuse happened last week. When we say history, we don't mean ancient history. We mean anything that has happened to the client in that client's lifetime. And if there are residual issues that the client has, the SLC is a part of the team to help to address it. We know that the clients we serve are a vulnerable population, and every member of that team needs to be on guard to prevent and protect our clients. And here are some example SLC duties. These are things that may be assigned by the waiver support coordinator. So if you look at the first 2 items, searching for homes or transitioning into a new home, those are 2 duties that only SLCs provide service for. Those are residential services. Now that third one, shopping and household chores, that could be either a supported living coach or a personal support provider. But if you're the WSC assigning responsibilities, what you probably be looking at is whether or not this person is going to need ongoing support to actually get these chores accomplished, or do they just need a little training and coaching so that they can take it on their own. So if they really can at some point take it on their own, take on the role, they just need some supported coaching, then that's probably better assigned to the supported living coach. If it's something that within their capabilities they may not be able to accomplish on their own, that probably is more for the personal support provider, because that's going to be that ongoing personal support to get their daily tasks done. Planning and operating a household budget, that's another one that only the supported living coach can do. Only the supported living coach can really deal with fiscal issues with the client. They get into helping them with those financial issues or financial concerns, the SLC can take on those responsibilities. Now, the personal support provider, that's not to say they can't help, assist the client with going around. Maybe they're helping them to pay their bills, taking them places and doing things like that. But when it comes to that financial management piece, the supported living coach would be the one that you would assign things to if necessary. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So, and then the last two are things that either SLC or personal support provider could be assigned. So let's talk a little bit about the additional SLC roles. There are fiscal roles that they can have, which is kind of what I was alluding to. An SLC can be a client's fiscal agent, which means that they may manage their finances, their budget. They may help them with paying bills and their bank accounts and all of that kind of financial management. They can also be a representative payee for the client's SSA benefits. Now, those are roles that they can have, and if they do have those kind of roles, your job as a WSC is going to be looking at that, looking at the client's budget and their financial statements, looking at that stuff on a monthly basis. So you're going to have a greater oversight when SLC is a fiscal agent. And let me just say, this is very important to note that these fiscal roles are to be avoided if possible. Remember, the SLC's goal is to help that client to be as independent as possible, to train them and coach them. Ideally, they should be working themselves out of a job as the client is gaining skills. That doesn't always happen, but ideally. And so if hopefully there's someone else in that client's life that's going to be with that client long term to help support if a fiscal role is needed. So please consider that. It is not ideal to assign fiscal roles to a supported living coach, and it only can be done in limited circumstances when there's no one else available within that person's circle of support. And then there are healthcare roles. A healthcare coordinator is an unofficial role. It's the person on the support team that helps to manage the medications and manage doctor's visits and make sure that that client's health care needs are being met. Sometimes this role is assigned if the client has medically complex needs, has lots of doctor visits and things like that. A medication administration provider, that role can only be assigned if the provider has the medication administration and validation certificates. That means they've taken those courses, they've taken the medication administration course, and they have been validated in the route of medication administration that the client has. So if the client has eye drops, then the person, the map has to be validated in that ophthalmic route. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I mean the eyes, putting eye drops in. So make sure as a waiver support coordinator, if you are looking at assigning a medication administration provider, that is an official role, that person has the certification is updated. And also, I recommend that all WSCs take that medication administration course. It has to be renewed on an annual basis, but take the course. It says on in our iBudget handbook that providers who provide direct services have to take that course. And even though you may not provide that direct service, it is important that you understand the ins and outs of medication administration. You understand that medication, that MAR record, and how to identify if there are any issues with that MAR. So I highly recommend it. Okay. The transition to supported living. If a supported living coach is helping a client to transition to supported living, please note that once that person is hired, that supported living coach is hired, they have 90 days to assist that client to transition. into supported living. That's the time frame that's set. So that's a very short time frame. And at the beginning of service, it's kind of intense. Let's go through it. So in the first 30 days of service, I call this the initial assessment and planning stage. And what happens during this stage, the SLC is doing all of their assessment. So they day one, they receive the support plan and service authorization from you, the WSC. Then you may start transition meetings. So you as the WSC, you're kind of responsible for that whole transition process. You may meet with, initially you might start meeting with the SLC, the client, and any member of the circle support that's going to be involved in the helping that client transition. You might start those meetings as soon as that first week. In my experience, I've had experience of working as a WSC and helping a client transition. And we met on a bi-weekly basis, bi-weekly. And as the time went on, we were able to slack up a little bit more. But early on, you probably are going to have to put in a little bit more time to make sure that you are assigning duties. And you may have to assign duties at one point, and then as you get a little further down, say, okay, we'll assign, more duties. So it's going to be more of an ongoing conversation. I think in reality, we have the assignment of duties and responsibilities checklist as a helpful job aid. You can use that, but just know that the meetings, it may not be one meeting. You may have to meet several times to make sure that you're capturing everything that clients needs, and as things pop up, you're capturing those things. So day one, they receive the support plan. By day 10, the supported living coach turns in the individual financial profile to you. It's due it's due at day 10. The functional community assessment is probably completed during this time. And I say that because you need that information in order to plan, in order to develop the implementation plan. The SLC will need to know what are some of the client's training needs, functional training needs, and so that they can plan a very detailed implementation plan and transition plan. And that plan is due to you on day 30. So it's pretty intense that those first 30 days. You and the SLC will be working pretty closely together to get things started right. And then I call the next phase the implementation and transition phase. Now, the transition meetings will continue, excuse me. The initial housing surveys are completed for any home that the client may move into. A housing survey must be done. Those surveys are based on HUD housing quality standards, and they must be done on any home. And so once a home is chosen, you as a WSC have to follow up. The SLC is the one that goes out with the client typically to help them choose a home, but you as a WSC have to follow up, put your stamp of approval to say, yes, that this home has met those housing standards. Okay, that they have met those housing standards. Day 45, the functional community assessment is due at that time. And by day 90, the lease is signed and the client moves into supported living. Okay. Now, the last phase, call this the home and life maintenance phase. This begins after that first intense 90-day period where you as the SLC may really think about on your service authorization, on your cost planning, to assign a little bit more time during that first 90 days to the supported living coach. But in that home and life maintenance phase, that's when the SLC begins to really support those clients' own home supported living goals, helping them to, gain the skills they need in their new environment. The WSC, you guys are going to conduct monthly face-to-face visits and quarterly meetings. Now we're going to go, we're going to go a little bit into the WSC responsibilities into supported living. So generally, you all will be responsible for coordinating the client's transition. You will assign duties and responsibilities to waiver service providers. You're going to monitor the services of the waiver service providers. And above all, safeguard the client's health, safety, and well-being. Those are your general duties. Now let's look at that same transition list that we looked at a few minutes ago, but from your perspective. And I would say you may want to, instead of like looking at it from the SLC's perspective of 3 phases, you have a 4th phase. You have a beginning of preparation and pre-planning. As soon as that client lets you know that there's an own home goal, they want to move into their own home, that's when that preparation and pre-planning begins. So you're going to help to identify the support needed to achieve the own home goal, help that client with that. You're going to help that client to set up interviews for service providers. It is so important that we make sure that they have the opportunity to interview at least 3 providers for every role. If they're hiring a new SLC or personal support provider, they need three for each. And then the client begins their preparation for transition. Any person moving into a new home, you know that it takes time, and 3 months may not work for everybody. Sometimes you need 6 months to get prepared. So it depends on the client. That timeline depends on when that client decides they want to move on into a home, and at what point do they want to, achieve that result. Okay, assigning duties and responsibilities. Like I said, one of your first activity with the supported living coach. And I'm going to say it's so important to set clear expectations with assigning duties and responsibilities. And it's important for you to know that a person in supported living, they are responsible for managing all of their own stuff. The client is responsible for managing their own time, their own daily living tasks. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they are on their own. They have to maintain their home, their finances, their transportation. So if you start off thinking that with the client, say, okay, if this client had to do all of that stuff on their own, what supports do they need? And unless we give specific responsibilities to support providers, whether unpaid or paid, the client is responsible for managing things on their own. So we want to make sure we put the right supports in place. So here's some things you want to consider. You want to ask yourself, what supports does this person need to live on their own? What natural and paid supports are they currently receiving? Okay, so we want to look at that and how will that transition? You're going to ask, what assistance will they need in the new environment? So they're what they actually have now with maybe their parents, or if they're in a group home, though some of that stuff, they won't have that. They won't have that support. So what will they need to replace it? And then which member of the support team will provide the support? It's not always a supported living coach or personal support. It might be a family member, and hopefully, or friend or someone else, and hopefully that will be the first line of support. All right, now let's talk a little bit more in depth about monitoring supported living service. So what do you guys really have to do? And the first thing you got to know is we got to look at that documents. We got to look at those documents. We want to review providers' documentation. And I've kind of divided the kind of documentation that they submit to you into 3 areas: assessment, planning, and progress tracking. So you want to make sure that what they're submitting to you, that they're demonstrating that they have planned the service, they have accurately assessed the clients, they have planned a good strategy to meet that person's needs, and they're making progress towards the client support plan goals and their service authorization, what the service you authorize them to do, what they're making progress towards that. And you want to make sure that the providers are getting that documentation into you. So like I was saying earlier, set very clear expectations up front and showing, you know, the chart showed when things are due. Be setting that expectation that, you know, you're gonna expect the documentation on time. You're gonna review that documentation on time. If they don't turn it into you, you send them a note. Hey, where's the documentation? I want to see how the implement, you know, how you plan to implement services. I want to see the progress on the person's support plan goals, that type of thing. And make sure that you email or provide some type of written backup to say that, you know, if you made a phone call, hey, just letting you know again, please turn in the documentation. I'm ready to review it. It's due on such and such time. So you want to have your ducks in a row as well in case there are any issues with that. Not saying we want to jump, because sometimes things happen and things get crossed up between emails, but we just want to give those general nudges at first and make sure that we're documenting. There's monthly face-to-face visits that you do when you're going into that client's home on a monthly basis. You're checking to see that their health and safety needs are met. You may be checking that MARS if they have medication administration. You're checking the financial records. If they have, if the supported living coach is a fiscal agent, that's what you would be doing. You're checking to make sure all systems are running smoothly, and that in that supported living environment, that client is getting the supports and services that they need to maintain their goals and maintain health and safety. Quarterly meetings, these are the big ones, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about quarterly meetings in a minute. But I just wanted to say here that the APD health and safety checklist is required. The SLC will start it off. They can complete that form before the meeting, and you as a WSC should be reviewing it to make sure it's all all of the information is correct and accurate. The APD health and safety checklist has the same items on it that are on the initial housing survey. And so you want to make sure that the housing is still adequate. There are no issues with the client's environment. There's no issues with the client's medication and doctor's visits. All of that stuff is on that APD health and safety checklist, and it's required. The SLC quarterly review checklist, however, it's recommended. So you can use that. And as another alternative tool, you might just flip open your iBudget handbook to page 2-90, and it lists everything that you need to be checking for on that page during your quarterly meeting. So you can use either or. So just know that checklist was devised to give you a job aid, so it's not recommended. Now, the APD health and safety checklist, formerly known as the quarterly home health and safety review checklist, that one is required. That one's in iConnect. That is the required one. And it also encompasses a review of the initial housing survey, because the items are the same. If you've ever looked at the initial housing survey next to the APD health and safety checklist, you will see that the checklist has 99% of the items from the initial housing survey. Okay, so I hope that clarifies. That seems to have been a big question. I'm going to go quickly through these slides. I've got 4 slides about the review requirements, but as I said, you can go back to page 2-90 and look at them. So, or also as a cool tip, you might be able to just take these slides and turn this into your meeting agenda, and just say, you know, I'm going to review progress towards the support plan goals. So you're going to look at the support plan, implementation plan, and progress notes for the quarter, and see what's going on with that client. You're going to ensure the client's health, safety, and well-being in the home. So you're going to look at the APD health and safety checklist. I put a little parentheses here, which includes a review of the housing quality standards. You're going to review medication administration. Now, this is a requirement. It's in the handbook. Providers who assist with medication administration or supervise self-administration, we talked about this earlier, They've got to maintain medication administration and validation certification. The SLC will make sure that it's their responsibility to make sure that the providers who are administering medication, which is typically not the SLC, but probably a personal support provider, but the SLC is responsible for ensuring that their certifications are up to date. Now, you as WSC need to check in and make sure, okay, are their certifications up to date? The SLC should be able to say, yes, they are. And are the providers validated in the client's primary route of administration, whether oral, eye, ophthalmic, whichever, the G-tube, whichever way they receive medication, the people administering medication should be validated. And the SLC, it is their responsibility to ensure that. So that is again in the iConnect handbook, page 2-90. You're going to review the management of financial resources. So if the client has an in-home subsidy, you're going to be looking to see that the financial profile is done and the expenses are accurate. Income and expenses are accurate. If the client receives assistance with financial management from the SLC, you're going to be looking at those bank statements, not just quarterly, but on a monthly basis. Okay, and you're going to be looking at their benefits. You're going to make sure that you provide that additional eyesight, that additional oversight to make sure there's no missing money, and that the client is going to maintain their waiver eligibility. If the client does not receive assistance with financial management from the SLC, you're still going to review their financial status and benefits with whoever is responsible. You still want to make sure that the client's benefits are correct and protected. So whether that's the client themselves, because sometimes they're responsible and they get a little support, maybe from the supported living coach. Without that supported living coach taking over finances, it's okay for them to just give support. And you review it. If they have a legal representative, you want to connect with that person to talk about the finances and make sure that the status is correct and there are no issues. You want to address any critical issues or concerns. That's the last part of the meeting. Any issues that may affect their health, safety, or well-being, or their stability within the home and community, you want to resolve any of those issues at that meeting. And if you can't find a resolution, please contact APD within 5 business days, because we need to know and offer support. So if there's something that is a detriment or significant risk to their health, a significant risk to their housing, we've had issues in the state where clients have had issues with housing, we want to get those resolved. You want the documentation. People always ask about the documentation of a quarterly meeting. There are 2 things that you need to have: your progress notes. The progress notes need to show that all those activities that I just described have taken place, and that you record anytime, like just good meeting notes, record any decisions, resolutions, changes to services, any action items, and your next steps for service delivery. You want to attach that supported document to, you want to attach that, keep that information in iConnect, your meeting agenda, all of that good stuff that should be tied to your quarterly meetings. Put it in iConnect, attach it as a note. You also want to ensure that APD health and safety checklist is completed and signed by you, the supported living coach, and the client. Make sure that's in iConnect. So those are the 2 things that you really need to be looking for, because that's what the CLARE reviewers will be looking for. So let's talk a minute about recurring issues and concerns: abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We mentioned that earlier, and that is a recurring concern. We continue to see this with the vulnerable population we serve. We continue to see this with clients in settings like a supported living setting, where there's not a family oversight. They're a vulnerable population, and they're also in a vulnerable setting. So we want to make sure that not only the supported living coach, but you as well are just keeping your eye out for that, and doing everything that you can to address abuse, neglect, and exploitation. You want to, or we want to prevent providers subleasing rooms and housing units to clients. That is not that is not a power dynamic that shows that the client is in control. If the provider owns the client's home, the provider is in control. So we don't want to see that. That's against our requirements and policies. The provider, um, the providers and the client families sometimes want to redefine supported living to be where the client is living with somebody and there's support involved. And that's not what it is. Supported living is about the client owning their own home. The power dynamic is that that person is in control of that environment. It's not a personal support provider who has a couple of extra rooms in their home and it's like, hey, I don't have to open up a group home. I'll just be a live-in personal support provider. It's not, it's not any of those situations. So we want to stay true to the definition. Clients living with personal support providers instead of living a live-in personal support provider. We want to avoid that. I'm going to explain that in another slide. And then the SLCs not meeting documentation requirements. That's something that if that happens, where they're not meeting documentation requirements after you've done your due diligence to give them like a little a nudge, there is for every region, there is an email address that you can call at APD. It'll start off like, for example, if you live in the Northwest region, it'll say Northwest dot, I believe the word is complaint apdcares.org. So let me say that again. So it'll be northwest.complaints@apdcares.org. So for every region, and you can go on our region, our website to look at region contacts, that page, it'll show you where to submit complaints about a provider. And that's generally the name of the website. For like for Central, it'll be central.complaints@apdcares.org. I hope that makes sense. So let's get into the question and answer period. And Susie, I'm going to have you to, if you don't mind, to start looking at questions while I just go through these first questions that we already know that providers have. If you can start kind of looking at it and maybe figuring out what are some of the issues that are coming up. So one of the questions that we always get is, what are the WSC's responsibilities if the client doesn't have an SLC? Well, it's listed in the iBudget handbook. You're going to, of course, continue everything to do the quarterly review process on page 2-90. And then on page 2-101, you're going to take on some of those other responsibilities. You're going to complete the initial housing survey. You're going to complete the APD health and safety checklist. You're going to complete the financial profile and review it quarterly. You will verify medication administration is accurate. And you're going to document those above activities in progress notes. So you'll take on some of their role. What are the requirements for monitoring live-in personal supports providers? You are going to verify that the client controls the schedule and activities conducted in the home. If they live with a personal support provider, they should own the home. The personal support provider should be paying their fair share of room and board, and the financial profile helps you to make sure of that. The family members or friends of the personal support provider cannot live with them in the client's home. It's the client's home. And the personal support provider, if possible, they should be listed as an occupant on the lease rather than a tenant. Some apartments make you ensure that everyone in the apartment's name is on the lease, but it would be best, if possible, that personal support provider is an occupant. And this is just to make sure that if something happens and the client has to fire that personal support provider, which they can do at any time, that personal support provider should be able to leave nice and clear freely with no issues. The household bills also should be in the client's name for this same reason. What if the client's family member owns the home? Can it still be a supported living setting? Yes, if the client's name is on the lease, mortgage, or deed. If the family member does not live with the client and the client's home meets the requirements for a supported living setting. Sometimes a family member has to be a guarantor for that person. You know, if they have really, you know, sometimes our clients may not have established credit and they need a family member support. So in those cases, yes. Who is responsible for completing the personal disaster plan for clients in supported living? The WSC is. You guys are responsible for completing it with the assistance of the circle of supports as part of that support planning process. The SLC should be a major part of that. And you may even assign the SLC to write it up for you. That is your prerogative, but it is essentially your responsibility to make sure that that document is completed as part of the support planning process on a yearly basis, updated. And there is in our handouts, there's some more FAQs about the personal disaster plan for you to read, but essentially it is your responsibility. What if a client refuses to provide financial information? Okay, and this is the SLC should know this because it's in their iConnect training. If they don't provide it, then what you can do is write down all of the information that you know in their IFP that's on in iConnect, and just add a note to indicate that the client has refused. You still want the client to sign off on the IFP, but you add a note that they have refused, and there is a specific iConnect note type for that. It is, the note type is supported living, and the subtype is IFP refused. So you can put that in there, and that will be your due diligence showing that it's done. But supported living coaches should know this because that's in their iConnect training. Okay, Susie, did you want to roll up any other questions?
We have just a few that we can go through. A couple of the questions on my side, there's several regarding the handouts. These handouts are listed in the drop-down box under handouts. There should be 4 of them, but if you're still missing them, you can please feel free to email me. But moving on, says, how does one living with their spouse in which they share a lease take away the need for supported living coaching?
Say that again. How does a spouse?
The question is, how does one living with their spouse in which they share a lease take away the need for supported living coaching?
Oh, I don't know that that does take away the need for supported living coaching. I wouldn't say that necessarily does take away the need for supported living coaching. I don't know that it does. You know what? Let's put that question to the side. And I also want to say that if some of the questions are a little bit more in depth, we may save them. We're going to have another more in-depth training on supported living coach. Susie, when did we plan that one?
We're looking at mid-December.
Okay, so in mid-December, we may get into some of these nitty-grittier questions and comments if we don't have the information today. So just know we're going to continue to look at these things and make sure that we get to them.
Hey, Opal, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Liesl. I just wanted to address that question and say that living with a spouse in and of itself does not negate the need for a supported living coach. In fact, somebody in supported living would benefit greatly from having a supported living coach. And if the spouse is also a client and living in supported living, they may also need a supported living coach. But if somebody has indicated, whether someone from the region or I don't know, someone else indicated that that's in rule or policy, that is incorrect.
Okay. And Lisa, I think it also, from what I hear you saying, it has to do with that spouse's capacity as well. Because if 2 APD clients are living in the same home and both of them are on the waiver, they're both on the waiver, that might be like an exception, right?
Well, in some cases, the spouse is not an individual with disabilities, and it's not a person who is a client of the agency and may be the person assisting our client with their finances and, with other things.
Yeah. So
It's
that would be
very
more like
tough.
a family home, right? Wouldn't it be a family? It would be more, if you have a family member that's helping and assisting, that negates the need for a supported living coach.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That may be another thing that we need to consider. But the fact of the matter is that if the person is residing in their own home, in supported living, we would actually encourage that they do get a supported living coach. And that's one of the things we're addressing in our draft rule. So that may be something that in the future, I'm not saying it's required now, but in the future, we may actually end up requiring a supported living coach for also people in supported living. That's not
Thank you.
currently a rule. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And that was my supervisor, Lisa Ramos, answering that question. Are there any other questions that we should answer before wrapping on up?
There are quite a few questions, but we can always, let's see. Who completes the APD health and safety checklist?
Who completes it? I think we answered that one. The APD health and safety checklist is completed by the supported living coach and reviewed by the waiver support coordinator during the quarterly meeting.
Okay. Let's see. Can the PS provider be assigned the medication role?
Which the medication administration provider role, yes, if they have their certification and they're validated in the client's primary route, yes, they definitely can be assigned. And typically they are assigned. It has to be somebody who is providing services on a daily basis in order to administer medicine. The supported living coach is typically there to provide some type of just oversight. They may check the medication administration record, make sure there are no errors, make sure things are going properly. Remember, because they always help with health and safety needs, even if they don't have an assigned duty to do so, they're going to help with that.
Awesome. All right, well, I will take the rest of these questions, make sure that they're downloaded and sent to Opal and Liesl so we can get them answered and sent out. So I think that's it at the moment, Miss Opal.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right, and do you have that final slide for us? For those of you attending today, we do have the slide. Here's the link to the class marker for the post-assessment test. I'm also posting the link in the chat. And if you somehow miss it from the on the screen or in the chat, it will also be emailed out to you in about an hour from the closing of the webinar. So I hope everyone has had my apologies, enjoyed this and been very informed. There was a lot of information in there, and we thank you for spending your morning with us.
Thank you, Susie.